So again, welcome everyone,
Yes.
and thank you for joining us for the DYI Seder on Zoom this year. And I would like to begin with a joke, because in the great tradition of Chabad, we always like to begin with a joke. So there was once a father, he calls his son right before, it was a few days before Passover, and he calls his oldest son, and he says, I just want to let you know, I thought about it a lot. Don't try to convince me otherwise. I'm going through a divorce with your mom. I've had enough all these years. It's over. And the son says, what, are you crazy, Dad? I never heard of this. I thought your relationship was wonderful. The father says, don't even try. Don't try to convince me otherwise. I made up my mind. The son says, don't do anything crazy. 1 minute, let me call my sister. I have to talk to her. Just hold on over there. Calls his sister, and he tells his sister what's going on. His sister says, we have to go to them for Passover. Make sure Dad doesn't do anything crazy before Passover. We're going to be there for Passover. We're going to save the situation. So he calls back his father, and he says, listen, don't do anything rash before Passover. Hold off. Me and my sister, we're coming home for Passover. We're going to be there with you, and we'll see after Passover. So he says, okay, no problem. He hangs up the phone. He calls his wife, and he says, honey, you won't believe it. Our kids are coming home for Passover, and they're paying for their own tickets. So this year, we unfortunately are not going to be spending Passover with many of our loved ones that we love to spend Passover with, whether it's other friends, family members, parents. I know my parents, both the Chaya's parents are going to be in Chicago by themselves. They've been coming here for many years for Passover. My parents are going to be in Miami. They always go to one of the kids for Passover. They're going to be by themselves celebrating Passover. And all of us here will be celebrating Passover by ourselves. So I just want to say that don't think that because you're going to be spending Passover by yourself, it's any less of a Passover. And actually, it's interesting, if you look at the first Passover, when all of the Jewish people were commanded in the Torah by Hashem to celebrate the first Passover, when we were leaving Egypt, we all partook in the Paschal Lamb, and it was by families. Each family it was also allowed to be extended family, but only families, not with your neighbors, not with friends, only families partook in the Paschal Lamb, and that was sort of their first Seder experience. And the question is asked, why? Why did it have to be alone with your family and not with other families? And one of the great commentaries explains that the reason for this is because we were about to become a nation. And when we become a nation, you could think that your individualism gets lost amongst others. You become part of the nation, you're just part of the whole. And you as an individual, or your family as an individual, is forgotten about. The nation is more important. So Hashem reminded us on the first Passover that don't forget about your family. The family comes first. The family is more important many times than the whole community. Meaning you could worry about the whole world, but forget about your family. And I think on this Passover, and really during this time, what's so great is that we can focus on that which is most important. We can focus on ourselves, making sure we have positive experiences, we are taken care of, we are inspired, and our families as well. The second thing I want to share is something that the Arizal said. The Arizal was a great Kabbalist. And the Arizal said that every year when we celebrate a holiday, on that date and that specific time, we are bringing those miracles back into our lives. So when we celebrate Passover, on Passover, the first night, the second night, and really all 8 days of Passover, but especially the first and second night, when we eat the matzah and we eat the maror, we drink the 4 cups of wine, and we tell the story and so on Passover, what we are actually doing is we are bringing those miracles back into our lives. Hello, Rabbi Shmulek, welcome. Thanks for joining us all the way in Brazil. Woo! It's great to have you here.
Hi, everyone. Great to tune in.
So the Arizal says that when we connect to the holiday and we remember the miracles, we open up ourselves to those miracles. And when do we need those miracles more than ever now. I mean, look at the world and the situation that we're in, the uncertainty, the panic, the illness, people losing loved ones. And we could use these miracles. So each and every single one of us on Passover, when we connect, we're actually bringing those miracles into our lives. And we do that as individuals, not just when we come together as a community. This year, when we do it ourselves, when we do it with our immediate family, it's actually going to be the biggest Seder in many ways. Every year, you have a public Seder here and a public Seder there. This is the year that we're going to have the biggest Seder here in Flagstaff and really all over the world, a Seder of individuals, everyone in their own homes celebrating Pesach, the first night of Passover and the second night of Passover at the Seders. And another thing is, to add, is that therefore the timing is very important. Having the Seder the first night and the second night of Pesach, of Passover outside of Israel, having it at night, after nightfall, is very, very important. Why? Because every year, the energy of Passover is in the world again. But when does it happen? Not by the day before Passover, not the day after Passover, but it happens on those specific times. And that's when we connect to it. And it even says that a greater light comes into the world each year. Every year, the light is even greater than the year before. So I would highly recommend that if it's hard for you to stay up late, or if it's difficult to eat very late, maybe you could eat before the Seder and take a nap. And the focus of the Seder should be on the most important things: eating the matzah, drinking the wine, eating the items of the Seder plate, and telling the story of Passover. The next thing I want to share is regarding Kabbalah. I always like to share different insights that come from Kabbalah, because the Kabbalah is what was given to us in order to bring the spirit into the actions that we do. It's compared to like a soul and a body. You can have a body, but without the soul, the body is really nothing. And you really need both of them. You can have a soul, but without the body, you're missing. So you can't just have Kabbalah, because Kabbalah without a mitzvah, is also like a soul without a body. But a mitzvah without the soul is not alive. And therefore, as we go through the Seder today, I want to share some insights as well as the meaning behind the mitzvahs that we do on Pesach night at the Seder, because this will make it alive. This will bring it alive for each and every single one of us. So the word Seder comes from the Hebrew word order. There's the famous Hebrew words, Hakol Beseder. Everything is in order. Everything is okay, right? If you want to say everything is okay in Hebrew, you say Hakol Beseder. But actually, there's a saying that says those words, Hakol Beseder, also means everything is in the Seder. You can find everything that is important inside the Seder. That's how important the Seder is. So what's interesting is that the word Seder comes from the word order, and yet Passover is all about extraordinary. And the word Pesach comes from the word to leap, right? Because Hashem leaped over the houses of the Jewish people during the plague of the firstborn. So it's actually quite interesting that here we are in Pesach, and we're doing a Seder, and everything has its order, all the things that we do. We drink the 4 cups of wine, we eat the matzah, we do the Haggadah in the proper order, and so on. Yet Pesach, Passover, is all about leaping, jumping. The Rabbi would even say that Passover is a time that you could break out of all of your boundaries more than you could ever break out of your boundaries the whole year. The whole year you take small steps, but on Passover you can take big steps. You could leap. And actually the Rebbe would even say that usually in life it's not a good idea to take big steps, because if you take too much of a big step, you fall backwards, right? If someone says, a New Year's resolution, they say, I am going to exercise every day. I'm going to go on the healthiest diet, and I'm going to get extra sleep this year. I'm going to do everything, right? You know what happens when you take on too much? It actually you end up falling back even more, because we can't take on too much at once. Smaller steps is more important in general. But on Passover, the Rebbe would always say, this is the time that you could take big steps. You could leap. Now, that's interesting because, again, the Seder is all about order. Well, I think the lesson that it teaches us is that sometimes when you want to make extraordinary steps in your life, it comes through the ordinary. It comes through the small things that we do. I just want to share a story. It's a story that I've shared many times. I love this story. I think it has so many messages, but it's the story of a chassid. There was a Jew, a simple Jew, who was very much connected and a student of the Baal Shem Tov. And he came to the Baal Shem Tov once and he said, I hear all these stories of these great people who saw Elijah the prophet. They saw Elijah the prophet, and because they saw Elijah the prophet, it was a big deal. Elijah saved them, Elijah revealed to them the secrets of the Torah, and so on. And he says, why should I be any different? I want to connect to Elijah. I want to see Elijah. Tell me what to do. The Baal Shem Tov, who was one of the great Hasidic masters, told him, listen, it's not so simple. You can't just see Elijah. It doesn't work like that. Okay, so he left, came back a few weeks later. He said, listen, I thought about it. Why don't you just tell me? Tell me what I have to do. Don't underestimate me. Tell me what I need to do. I will do it. I want to see Elijah the prophet. The Baal Shem Tov said, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't happen like that. That's not the way it works in life. Okay, he left again. The next time he comes back to him, it was a little before Passover, and he says, listen, I am not leaving your study until you tell me what I need to do to see Elijah. There's no reason why I should be deprived of this privilege. So the Baal Shem Tov says, okay, you know what? This is what you need to do, and if you follow this to the T, you will see Elijah the prophet. He says, okay, tell me what it is. He says, in a town, a few days' journey from here, at the edge of the city, there is a house. And in this house, there's a very poor family. And they don't have any money. And Passover is coming, and they don't know what to do for Passover. They have a lot of children. There's a lot of expenses to buy the wine. The shmura matzah is very expensive. The food for the Seder, they have no means. They don't even have new clothing for the children. It's a tradition that the children get new clothing for the holiday. What are they to do? I want you to go, bring with you lots of food for the holiday, bring with you some money to give them, and bring new clothes and even some furniture for their home. And this is going to bring such a joy to their holiday, and you will see Elijah the prophet. And he said, I want you to stay with them for the first days of Passover, and trust me, you will experience to see Elijah the prophet. He says, wow, that's all I have to do? This is amazing. I thought it would be much harder. So he goes and he prepares all these things, and he travels to see them. He comes, to make a long story short, he comes to the house, he knocks on the door, the children open up, they're so excited, they go to their parents, we have guests, we have someone who wants to join us for Passover. They come to the door, they say, listen, we don't have any food, we don't have anything, we would love for you to be our guest, but we don't have anything to give you for Passover. He says, don't worry, I came prepared, I have so much wonderful things for you and your family. They welcome him in, and he brings in all this food and clothing, and they have the best Passover ever. So the first night, they're sitting at the Seder, and he's thinking to himself, when am I going to see Elijah the prophet? Of course, I know what the Baal Shem Tov meant. When I open the door for Elijah, I'm going to see Elijah the prophet. So he tells the host, could you do me a favor? I would love to open the door for Elijah the prophet this year. Is that okay with you? They said, of course, you brought us all this food, this wonderful stuff for the holiday, and our children are so happy. Please be our guest. So he goes, he opens the door. Lo and behold, he doesn't see Elijah. It's like every other year, we hope we're going to see Elijah. We tell the children, Elijah is coming, and Elijah is coming, but he doesn't get to see Elijah. The Baal Shem Tov told him, if he does this, he's going to see Elijah. He's a little frustrated, but he thinks, there's always a second chance, maybe tomorrow night. Again, to speed up a little bit, the next night, they're at the Seder again. He says, please, can I open the door? They said, sure, no problem. And he goes and he opens the door. No Elijah. Now he's really upset. After the first 2 days of Passover, he travels back a few days to be by his Rabbi. And he comes he's back by the Baal Shem Tov, and he says, Baal Shem Tov, I don't understand. You told me if I do this, I will see Elijah the prophet. He said, listen, you really want to see Elijah the prophet? He says, what do you mean? You told me already I'm going to see Elijah. He said, you're almost there. You did the first part. You just have to do one more thing. And I guarantee if you do this and you follow this to the T, you will see Elijah the prophet. Now he's thinking maybe the Baal Shem Tov is just playing a game with him, but the Baal Shem Tov doesn't play games. The Baal Shem Tov is a very holy Jew, very holy rabbi. He says, okay. The Baal Shem Tov says, listen, you were there the first days, but now what are they going to eat for Passover the last days? They don't have any food left. Go again for the last days. Join them for the last days of Passover. Bring them some more food. Bring them some more charity. And you will see Elijah the prophet. But he says, actually, there's one condition. If you actually want to see Elijah the prophet, what you have to do is, before you knock on the door, listen in to the door, to what is being said inside the house, before you knock, and only then will you merit to see Elijah the prophet. He says, okay, this is an interesting thing, but okay, I'll do what the Baal Shem Tov says. So he goes, he travels all the way back, and he comes there right before the holiday. This is the day before, the eve of the last days of Passover. He's about to knock on the door. And he remembers the Baal Shem Tov said, do not knock on the door, listen in. So he puts his ear to the door, and he listens in. And he hears that one of the children is crying out to their parents and saying, what are we going to do? What are we going to do for the last days of Passover? You know, there's no food in our home. We ran out of matzah. There's no wine. There's no grape juice. There's no food. What are we going to do for the last days of Passover? And he hears the mother reply and says, don't worry. Just like God sent us Elijah the prophet for the first days of Passover, God will send us Elijah the prophet for the last days of Passover, and we will have everything taken care of. Trust me. Suddenly, he knocks on the door. And that's when he realizes that what the Baal Shem Tov was telling him is that he was the Elijah the prophet. And this story is so important because sometimes we want to experience big things. We want big things to happen. But it's actually in the ordinary things that we do. It's in the small things that we do. It's in the small rituals that we do. You know, we think, you know, we're only eating a little bit of matzah. We're only drinking a little bit of wine. I'm saying the Haggadah, what are we accomplishing? But actually, the Seder, what the Seder is all about is that it's through the ordinary. And it's actually through following these steps of the Seder that's been passed down from generation to generation. And actually, biblical mitzvahs in the Torah, like eating the matzah and the maror, through this, we are accomplishing great things. So the next thing I would like to talk about is the significance of the major items at the Seder. And at some point, we'll go through we have a checklist that's in the chat box and was also emailed. And we also have a synopsis of the Seder, step-by-step guide of the Seder that we can go through as well. So the first thing I would like to share is hello, Marsha, is that you? Welcome everyone who joined after we got started. It's great to have you here. And right now, everyone is on mute. You can mute yourself at the bottom left, but if you need to talk, or at the end when we have questions and answers, you can unmute yourself. So the first and most significant aspect of the Seder is the matzah. So why is it the matzah? Because if you had one choice on Passover, if you only had money, and there's actually discussions, you know, in Jewish law, a person can't afford all the foods of Passover, and you can only do one thing. What would you do for Passover? What would you do at the Seder night? And the answer is eating the matzah. The matzah is actually a biblical mitzvah. The first night even more than the second night, but really both nights are very important. And to eat the matzah on the Seder night after nightfall. And we should really eat, there's a specific amount that we eat, but it's very important to have the shmura matzah, which is the hand-baked matzah, because it's a very careful process that they go through. It's hand-baked just like our ancestors did. And in Kabbalah it says, in the Zohar, the famous book of Zohar, it says, whoever eats the matzah on the first and second night of Passover, it accomplishes two things. Number one, it heals our faith. And number two, it brings physical healing. So I think more than ever before this year, eating the shmura matzah, the hand-baked matzah, will bring many, many blessings to us, our families, and the entire world, blessings of healing that we all need. And the Rabbi would encourage, different times of the year, the Rabbi would encourage that we should share the mitzvah of the holiday with others. So for example, on the holiday of Sukkot, the Rabbi would encourage that we should go out and we should shake the lulav and etrog with any Jewish person, that they should have the opportunity to do this mitzvah. On Rosh Hashanah, the most important mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah is, does anyone know? What is the most important? You could put it in the chat if you want. You could chat it. What is the most important mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah?
I think it's hearing the shofar. Hearing
the shofar. Excellent. So even though going to the synagogue is very important and dipping the apple and honey is very important, but actually hearing the shofar is called the mitzvah of the day. What is the mitzvah of Passover? The mitzvah, if you want to say, eating the matzah is number one. We'll discuss a few others. Now, what is matzah all about? So like I said earlier, I want to share the Kabbalah side of the mitzvahs because that's so important. So what happened on Passover? Passover is when we became a nation. In Kabbalah, it explains it's like a child was born. Passover is when we, the Jewish people, were spiritually born. That's when we became a nation. After we left Egypt, Hashem said, I'm taking you out of Egypt to be my nation. And eventually, 50 days after going out of Egypt, Hashem gave us the Torah. So it's really the beginning of a spiritual journey. That's why on Passover, it's so important that we begin this journey in the healthiest way. The most important thing, if someone wants to begin a spiritual journey, right? What is the most important thing that a person has to do in order to begin a spiritual journey? Does anyone want to share it? Again, you could put it in the chat. At the bottom, you could click the chat and type it in. What is the most important way to begin a spiritual journey? If you want to grow, what is the most important thing to do? And it's actually connected to healing as well. If you would like to heal, anyone want to share? Reflection. Sarah Golitz says reflection. Welcome, Sarah. Great to have you on. Anyone else? You could just post one word. Any spiritual journey. We're trying to grow. We're trying to heal. Prayer. Beautiful. Ivy, thank you. Do we have one more? Cultivate inner silence. Beautiful. Thank you, Janine. Perry Wood, prayer. If anyone else wants to add, you could always add. So the beginning of every spiritual journey, all of these are true. And what I'm going to say does not negate any of these. It's just one of these very important aspects of beginning any spiritual journey. And according to Kabbalah, it's actually the beginning. And the answer is humility. If we want to grow, if you want to heal, you first have to know that there's something that I don't know. Maybe someone else could help me. I can't heal myself. There's a famous saying, I think it says it in the Talmud. It says a person in prison cannot lift themselves up by their own ear, right? Try to lift yourself up with your own ear. So it's an expression in the Talmud. You need someone on the outside to help. So humility is the beginning of every spiritual journey. If you want a plant to grow, the first thing that you have to do is you put the seed into the ground. And before a plant will grow, first the seed needs to rot. It's actually an amazing idea. The idea of first being broken in order to grow, right? Any negative experience, the reason we grow from it is because of the humility that it brings to us. Even now, if you take these times and you think about it for a moment, all the things that we took for granted, perhaps, and the luxuries of life, and the teachers, schools, even technology, our health, and so on, meaning the beginning of every spiritual journey is just recognizing that we have how to grow and where to grow. So Passover, when we become a nation and we are born, and this is the beginning of a major spiritual journey, and the journey actually goes from Passover until the holiday of Shavuot when we receive the Torah. 49 days later, and Kabbalah explains that there's 7 attributes of the soul. Every day, starting from the first day of Passover until the 50th day of Shavuot, there's 49 days. We work on and we refine another attribute of our soul, because the soul is made up of 7 attributes of 7. Every attribute of the soul is made up of the other 7. And there's some beautiful books which actually go through each day refining another part of ourselves. But the journey begins on Passover. And in order to begin this Passover, we need to have humility. So matzah represents humility, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And when we eat the matzah, we're actually eating humility. And it has an effect on our entire physical and spiritual body, and that's why it brings physical healing and spiritual healing as well. So that's why the matzah is so important on Passover. And why does matzah represent humility? Because bread represents inflated ego. It has a chance to rise. And matzah is flat. It's without the inflated ego. And even if you look at the word chametz and matzah, it says that the 2 words, chametz means leaven, like bread, and matzah is the matzah. What is the difference between matzah and bread? They're exactly the same. Flour and water makes bread. The only difference is the inflation, the rising of the bread, which is different than the matzah. Matzah represents humility. And if you know the Hebrew letters of the 2 words, chametz and matzah, they're almost identical. They both have 3 letters. Chametz is ches mem tzadik. Matzah is mem tzadik hey. The only difference between the 2, they're scrambled, is the letter hey, which looks like this in matzah at the end, and then chametz has a ches, ches mem tzadik. Same letters, just there's one letter different in each, the ches or the hey. So it says in Kabbalah that when a person has humility, there's the opportunity to always go upwards. There's a little hole at the top. So you could always go up as long as you have humility. When it's chametz, the only opportunity is to go down. Meaning when a person is so inflated with their own ego and they can't hear someone else's opinion, and they can't imagine that there's something else out there besides themselves, and there's no room for another person, and so on, in our inflated ego, and we could only think about ourselves, there is no opportunity for growth. So that's why on Pesach, on Passover, when we eat the matzah, we are ingesting, we're taking in this special quality of humility. Now we could do this the whole year, but it says we actually should not eat the matzah 30 days before Passover, in order that when we eat the matzah on the night of Pesach, that we should feel it, that it should be something special. By reserving it and not having it for 30 days before Passover, when we have it on Passover, it's very special. But more than being special, when we have it on Passover, like I said earlier, we're connecting to the spiritual energy of the time. Passover, this year, like every year, we begin a spiritual journey, whether we know it or not. We become a nation again. We're opening ourselves up to miracles. And in order to be open to all of these things, it begins with humility. So that's the matzah. The next biblical mitzvah that we have on Passover is maror, the bitter herbs. So if we, again, had an opportunity on Passover to have one item, it would be matzah. We could add a second item, right? If we weren't able to leave our homes, we couldn't get anything on Passover, we could only get one other thing, it would be the maror, the bitter herbs, and it wouldn't even be the wine. So it would be the bitter herbs. Now, what is the bitter herbs? The bitter herbs, there are different opinions on what it is, but there's actually 5 different opinions on what are you supposed to have for the bitter herbs, but everyone agrees on the horseradish root itself and romaine lettuce. And therefore, what we do is the tradition in Chabad is to combine the 2, because you're supposed to have a certain amount of it, a kazayas, which is a few stalks of romaine lettuce, and then we sprinkle on the horseradish. It's difficult to eat that much of horseradish. There would be a lot of crying going on, a lot of bitterness, maybe more than we want, and therefore we have it with the stalks, because the stalks themselves have a little bit of a bitterness. It actually says if you leave it for a long time, it gets more and more and more bitter. So now, why do we have the bitter herbs on Pesach? Because Passover, we're not just remembering our freedom, which is what the matzah represents, but it's a time that we reflect on the time of our slavery, the bitterness of the slavery. And in order to appreciate freedom, you actually have to taste the bitterness in general in life. Like if life was all ups and there were no downs, and if in life there was no challenges and we were constantly, everything, there was no, imagine a life of no moods, right? I'm always happy. Everything is always wonderful. Everything is always good. There's no ups, there's no down. I'm never angry. I'm never sad. I'm never, it's just a life of where everything is up. We would not appreciate the beautiful things in life. And that's why on Passover, to remember, that's why on Passover, in order to remember the bitterness and appreciate the freedom that we have, we eat the maror. And it's actually a biblical mitzvah. This was a mitzvah that was done the first night when we left Egypt. Even before we left Egypt, we had the bitter herbs together with the Paschal lamb. And it's a mitzvah every year to have the bitter herbs. So that is number 2. Number 3, we have the korech sandwich. The korech sandwich is not a biblical mitzvah, but it's today what we eat instead of the Paschal lamb. So that's why it actually says in the middle of the Haggadah, whoever doesn't say these 3 things or talk about these 3 things at the Seder didn't fulfill their obligation. Matzah, the maror, and the korech, which reminds us of the sandwich. What was the sandwich? So today we eat matzah, more and more maror, and we eat it with a sandwich. Not very delicious. But it used to be, in the times of the temple, what was it? It was a paschal, it was matzah together with lamb chops, deliciously roasted on the fire, and that was a sandwich. And some people even say from the way that it talks about it was actually a wrap, because it says you wrap it together. So some say that it used to be that the matzah, the way they made it was thicker, and you could actually wrap it like a wrap. It just didn't have time to rise, but you were actually able to bend the matzah. We can't imagine matzah like that today, but it was like this delicious wrap sandwich that we would eat. But that was and the mitzvah is we would have it every year during the times of the temple to remind us of the Paschal lamb that was brought during the plague of the killing of the firstborn, when we took the blood and we put it on our doorposts, and Hashem passed over the homes of the Jewish people, and we were saved from the plague of the killing of the firstborns in Egypt, which was the last plague before Pharaoh let the Jewish people go. And every year there's a mitzvah to partake in this. Now, today we are actually not allowed to eat any lamb at the Seder, not because we're vegetarians, even though that's a wonderful thing. The reason why we don't eat the Paschal lamb is because you're not allowed to eat a sacrifice of any kind when the temple is not around, or even when the temple was around, you were only allowed to do it over there. So that's why the tradition is we put the shank bone or a neck bone or another bone that has very little meat on it on the Seder plate, but we don't eat it because it's only there to remind us of the Paschal lamb. We're not allowed to eat from it. So when we eat the korech sandwich, which is the matzah and the romaine lettuce, that's actually the reminder, that's commemorating this very special mitzvah of the Karban Pesach, the Paschal lamb, which all the families would partake in during the times of the temple. What's interesting is, it's an interesting note, that there's 3 major holidays of the year when all the Jewish people would go to the temple in Jerusalem when the first and second temple were standing. The first one is the holiday of Passover. The second is the holiday of Shavuot, when we receive the Torah. And the third is Sukkot, the holiday of when we eat inside of the sukkah. Now, these 3 holidays represent really what it means to be a nation. Because in order to be a nation, you have to have three things. Every nation needs to have three things. Number one, you have to have freedom. You cannot be a nation without freedom. You have to have your independence. Number two, you have to have a constitution. And number three, you have to have an economy. You could have the first two, but if you don't have an economy, the nation falls apart. If you don't have a constitution, there's no constitution, there's no nation. Passover represents our freedom as a Jewish people. The holiday of Shavuot represents our constitution that comes from Hashem, the Torah. And the third is the holiday of Sukkot, which represents that our sustenance comes from Hashem. That's why during the season of the harvest, we leave our homes and we go eat in a sukkah to remind ourselves that our protection and really our economy, a healthy economy, doesn't only come from our hard work, but it comes from Hashem. So it's an interesting note. Now, what's interesting is that what do we do here in America on July 4th to celebrate our independence? We have a barbecue. So what's interesting is that the first barbecue that ever existed, where it talks about a barbecue for independence, is actually in the Torah. We know that the source of many things is in the Torah. What did we do when we became a nation? We barbecued a lamb. That's what the Jewish people did. It was actually a mitzvah in the Torah that we should all take a lamb and do a nice barbecue and partake in it. And this was a reflection of our independence. It was also just an interesting thing is that the Paschal lamb was taken from the lamb specifically because the lamb was one of the gods of Egypt. Egypt had many gods. For example, the Nile River was one of their gods. Pharaoh was a god in his mind. And they would worship all of these. The sheep was also their god. And that's why Hashem told the people to take the sheep and attach it to their bedposts 4 days before they left Egypt to test the Jewish people and to see if they were willing to do this, even though it meant, imagine you were slaves for 200 years in a land and you were going to take their God as a sacrifice. This is a big deal. And it could have caused that all the Jewish people would have been killed because of this, but actually what it caused was a civil war. All of the young people went ahead and they fought against their own parents and the government because they heard that the last plague was going to come, the plague of the firstborn. Now imagine you were an Egyptian and there were 9 plagues that came about. Every time Moses warned the Egyptians, the plague came true. What would happen when you're told, by the way, there's one more plague coming and it's the plague of the firstborn. And if you were a firstborn in Egypt, you would be quite nervous and upset. And they actually went and there was a civil war against this was the Egyptians against themselves. And we actually celebrate this every year on this Shabbat. It's called Shabbat Hagadol, on this Friday night, Saturday, the Great Shabbat, because it represents that when we do what Hashem wants, when we go in the ways of Hashem, the world supports us. Meaning sometimes you think that if I go ahead and I do this mitzvah or that mitzvah, people are going to mock me, they're going to laugh at me, no, but we actually find that when we do what Hashem tells us to do or asks us to do in the Torah, it brings about even the support from those around us. They will support us in our endeavors. So that's just another interesting thing. So we talked about the matzah, we talked about the maror, and we talked about the bitter herbs, and we talked about the korich sandwich. The next thing to talk about is the 4 cups of wine. So on Pesach, we know that there's a tradition to drink 4 cups of wine. Why do we drink 4 cups of wine? We drink 4 cups of wine because wine represents joy. Every holiday, every Jewish celebration, whether it's a bris, a bar mitzvah, a wedding, there's always wine, and we make l'chaims, and there's blessings that are made over the wine. And the same on Shabbat every week, and the same thing is with Passover. But on Passover is different. Everything on Passover is different, right? Why is this night different than all other nights? We drink 4 cups of wine. Why? Because in the Torah, it mentions 4 words connected to the redemption, where Hashem said, I'm going to take you out, and I'm going to redeem you. I'm going to bring you. There's 4 words that the Torah uses they're called 4 expressions of redemption. Each cup of wine represents another expression of redemption, which again, when we drink this cup of wine, we are actually causing an internal escaping from our own Egypt. It's in Hebrew, the word Mitzrayim, in Hebrew, the word for Egypt is Mitzrayim. It comes from the word Meitzar, which means restrictions and boundaries, limitations. And it says, in every generation, every single person should see themselves as if they are leaving Egypt. Today, right now. And in Kabbalah, it speaks about this a lot, that really our job in this world is to leave Egypt. That's what it is, our own internal Egypt. We all have a Pharaoh inside of us. We all have a Moses inside of us. We all have the struggles. This is what life is all about, but it's our job to go out of our own internal Egypt. There is no better time to do this than on Passover and then during the Seder itself. It says the 15 steps of the Seder is actually brings about our own internal redemption. And that's why the 4 cups of wine, each one represents going out of our own Egypt. Now, after 4 cups of wine, we're definitely going to all break out of our own Egypt for different reasons. So I just want to share, it does not have to be on wine. Wine is the best. There's no question. Even people who have a hard time drinking wine, a difficult time, and they would prefer grape juice, those who really want to drink the 4 cups of wine, they try to find a wine that's very dry and low in alcohol. And there's certain wines out there, there's certain kosher wines that you could get for Passover. One example is Eminent Dry from Zaykan wine. They make a special one for the Seder for people who don't want, it's very low in sugar. That's an important thing also, very low in sugar. Because for some people, it's more than the alcohol is the sugar itself. It's very low in sugar and low in alcohol. It's called Eminent Dry from Zaykan. So you could probably order it somewhere online. And if you're not able to do that, or if you're having a hard time finding kosher wine, you could get it in most of the stores over here. You could get you could get a grape juice from Kedem. Hello, Rhoda, welcome. Thank you for joining us. So so that's number 1. Number 2, the drinking of the 4 cups of wine that's throughout the Seder, and there's a certain measurement that you should have for the wine. It's approximately 5 ounces, but it's actually even a little bit less. I'm sure you could look it up in different places. What is the exact measurement that you're supposed to drink for the 4 cups of wine? But think about a 5-ounce cup of wine. That's perfect. It's not so big. It's better to have a smaller cup of wine and drink 4 of them than to, have a big cup and not be able to drink through all of it. The other thing is that in general, it's best to drink at least half the cup. When we make Kiddush on Shabbat or the holidays, we drink at least half the cup. On Passover, you could it's best to drink the full cup. They say the blessings are at the bottom of the cup. So if you could drink the full 5 ounces, and if you split it up throughout the night, it's a very special thing to do. But again, I want to reiterate, more important than anything, the drinking of the 4 cups of wine is not a biblical mitzvah. And therefore, it doesn't make light of it, because we know that, the teachings of some of the most beautiful things that we do in Judaism, the traditions came from the sages, and it's very important, and it actually has the same importance as the biblical. But one should remember that that our priorities should be straight. Remembering that the first is the matzah, the most important. The second is the maror. Then we have the korech sandwich, and the wine is very important, or the grape juice. But if one has a very, very difficult time doing it, and they're not able to do it, or your doctor recommends that you shouldn't do it, then that's something to consider. But it shouldn't take away from the other things that you're doing. Again, I'm not making light of the 4 cups of wine. The 4 cups of wine is very important, and it's a very important part of the Seder. So that's that. The next thing I would like to do is go through the Seder plate. So if you have the attachment, looks like this. It's called Step by Step Passover Seder. You could also look at the beginning of our chat. Felicia posted it. So if you scroll up to the top of the chat at the bottom, you could click on the scroll up, and she posted the 3 items. If you don't have it, You can email us and we'll send it to you afterwards. So let's go through the items of the Seder plate. Again, it looks like this. So there's different traditions of how to set up the Seder plate. So if you go online, for example, and it's a reliable source, and you see one of the ways to set up the Seder plate is different than the way that I'm saying, that's perfectly fine, because there are different ways to set up the Seder plate. However, the items that I'm talking about here, these are the 6 items that everyone agrees, these are the 6 placements that you have on the Seder plate. The order that we do it is non-essential, but as long as you're following one of the ways of setting it up through a reliable source. So the way I'm going to say it, this is Chabad tradition, and the top left of the Seder plate, we have the egg. So does anybody know why do we have an egg at the Seder? Does anyone want? You could post it in the chat at the bottom. Why do we have an egg at the Seder? What does the egg represent?
Doesn't it represent like birth or life?
Yes. Great, Stuart. Thank you. The Seder represents, the egg, the Beitzah, represents the cycle of life. It's round. There's a tradition in a Shiva home where someone is sitting Shiva to have an egg. On Tisha B'Av, we dip the egg in ashes because an egg represents the cycle of life. And why do we have it on our Seder table? Why do we have it on our Seder plate? The reason why we have it on our Seder plate, it's to commemorate one of the 2 sacrifices that were brought on the holiday of Passover. On Passover, we would have the Korban Pesach, the Paschal lamb, which is not what the egg is to represent, but there was also the Korban Chagiga, which was the special Korban for the holiday. It was a holiday sacrifice. Again, today we don't do sacrifices, and therefore, but to commemorate this, we have the egg. And why the egg? Because it represents the cycle of life. And again, the cycle of life, what's so beautiful about the cycle of life is that it's a circle. You know, there's the Frierdiker Rebbe, the 6th Chabad Rebbe once said that life is like a Ferris wheel. When a person is at the top of the Ferris wheel, they think they're in the top of the world. Can't get any better, you know, can never go down from here. I'm on top of everything. And right when you're at the top and the views are the most beautiful, you're like, wow, this is the best ride in the world, it starts going down. And then before you know, you're at the bottom. You're like, why did I pay for this ride? There's nothing, I can't see anything. I'm all the way at the bottom. But then again, you start going back up again. Right when you get to the lowest point is when you start going up again. And this is the same thing with life. It actually represents the sandwich, that I mentioned earlier. We take the matzah, which represents our freedom. We have the maror, which represents the bitterness, and we dip it in the sweet charoset, which represents the sweetness of life, the cycle of life. What life is a sandwich, right? It's everything. It's the good, the bad, the ugly. It's everything. That's what makes life beautiful. It's not just the ups, but it's also the downs. And that's when we appreciate it even more. And that's why, again, at the Seder, the egg represents the cycle of life. We were slaves, and then we became free, and we became slaves afterwards. And the Jewish people have gone through many cycles, but it represents the life in general, the cycle of life.
Why do we roast it?
What's that?
Why do we roast the egg?
We don't have a tradition to roast egg. All we do is we boil the egg. And so I don't know if some have a tradition to roast. What you do roast is the shank bone or the neck bone that we roast, but the egg really is just boiled. Again, there may be another tradition that I don't know about, but it could be that it was mixed up with the roasting of the neck bone or the shank bone. And the tradition is to leave the shell on the whole Seder, and we only eat the egg right before the meal, right before the beginning of the meal, before we even wash. After we did the matzah and the maror, then we have from the egg. And so we keep the shell on, and then we peel it right before the Seder.
In my family, we always did a tradition of just coloring the egg for the kids too, to like kind of make it a little bit of fun too. So.
Yes, well, the Seder is it's very important that the Seder should be fun for the kids as well. It's actually the main focus, but we should always remember if the children are not there, everything that we normally do for the children, we do ourselves, whether it's the manashtana or other things, the dipping of the vegetable in salt water, which it's all about the children asking the question. We do it because it says we are all children. Even though many of these traditions started for the children, we are really all children. We're always growing, we're always learning, and they're all very special traditions. So that's the egg at the top left. Bottom left is the karpas. It's the vegetable that we dip in the salt water. And there are many different traditions for this. Some use parsley, some use celery, some use potatoes, some onions. The Chabad tradition is either a potato, a peeled potato, or an onion dipped in the salt water. But again, it's really any vegetable. Ideally, it should not be sweet because the whole point of the vegetables, we dip it in the salt water to remember the tears of slavery. So it really shouldn't be a sweet vegetable, but it doesn't have to be bitter. That's why you could use a potato because the whole point is you dip it in the salt water, and that reminds us of the tears of the Jewish people. Then we have on the top right, we have the zeroa. The zeroa is either a shank bone or a neck bone. You could use it really a chicken wing or a drummet, a leg. It doesn't really matter so much, but the main thing is, hello Meryl, welcome. The main thing is that we don't eat it. We roast it, we don't eat it because we don't eat from it. It's only there to commemorate the Paschal Lamb. We eat the sandwich instead. The next, bottom right is the charoset. So the charoset is to remind us, this is the mix of apples and nuts and wine or grape juice, and this is to remind us of the mortar that the Jewish people had to make when we were slaves. Even though it's sweet, it reminds us that when you look at it, it looks like mortar. It reminds us of the slavery, of the bitter work that we had to do when we were slaves and how hard it was. And I would say if you have not made charoset before, it's not that difficult. The first time you make it, it may not taste amazing, but try it and you can really experiment. It's very easy. All you do is you grind up apples. Some people add pears. And some walnuts. You could take some walnuts and crush some fresh walnuts. For Passover, it's actually best if you could find walnuts in the shell and crack them yourselves, unless you could find walnuts in Passover in Flagstaff that are kosher for Passover. But either way, walnuts, you could grind them, and then adding a little bit of wine, a sweet wine. The sweeter the better. A little sweet wine. It can be Manischewitz, Rashi wine, or grape juice is wonderful. And then experiment with it, and it's quite delicious and it's fun to make, and it's always a wonderful part of the Seder. The next two items on the Seder plate, we have the middle two. The top one is the maror. Like I mentioned earlier, our tradition is to put a piece of romaine lettuce with shredded or ground horseradish root on it, and below that we have the charoset, which is the same thing. It's actually the romaine lettuce with some horseradish on top, ground horseradish, and you add that to your maror and your korech sandwich. So the maror, when you eat your maror, you take this from the Seder plate, you put it with your maror, and you eat it. And the charoset, which is below it, is what you take for your maror and matzah sandwich, called the korech sandwich, and you put it inside. So, and then for both of these, the maror and the charoset, you dip it a little bit into the charoset. So again, by the end of your Seder, you will have eaten the egg at the beginning of the meal. You will have eaten the vegetable towards the beginning of the Seder when you dip the vegetable in the salt water. The zeroa we don't eat. The charoset is used for the dipping, and many people also eat it at the beginning of the meal. And then the maror is eaten together with the maror, and the charoset is eaten together with the charoset. So that covers the Seder plate. The other items that we have at the table is salt water. It's just mixing salt and water. It's actually best to do this during the day before Passover. And then we have it on our table, and we dip the vegetable in the salt water. And another important item of the Seder is the Haggadah. We have a checklist here, and I'll go through the checklist in a moment, but the Haggadah. The Haggadah, what does the word come from? It comes from the Hebrew word Haggadah, which means it comes from the word magi, to tell. It used to be, in the olden days, there was someone known as the Magid, that was the preacher. They would go around from community to community, and they would literally preach. We don't have that today. And the Baal Shem Tov was actually very opposed to many of the preachers, because he always felt that the preachers would make the people feel bad. And this is actually a very, very important tradition in Chabad, that the purpose of Judaism is not that we should feel guilty, even though we all have lots of Jewish guilt, and maybe it's part of our DNA, but actually there should be no guilt. It's not a Judaism of guilt, but it's a Judaism of joy, and we should appreciate it, and we should do it with love, not from a place of fear. And that's why today we actually don't have so much the idea of the preachers. But Magi means to tell the stories. A lot of times they would tell stories. So the Magi comes from the word to tell a story. The Haggadah, what is the Haggadah about? What's the primary point of the Haggadah book? Is to tell the story of Passover. And that's why another very important element of the Seder is to have our Haggadah. There's many different versions of the Haggadah. And we included this, which is, if you don't have a Haggadah and you're not able to get one, you could copy this, and it goes through the most important passages of the Seder, because if you skip around on your own, you may skip some of the most important parts of the Seder, and this shows you all the important things to do the night of the Seder.
I have lots of Haggadahs, and people are welcome to them, and they can keep them. They'll be on the back deck by my back door in an ice chest.
Wow, thank you, Rhoda. Rhoda just said if anyone needs a Haggadah, you can go to their house, and they'll have a Haggadah by the back in the ice chest. Thank you, Rhoda and Meryl. So there's a few things that I want to finish with, and that is we have I want to talk about setting our table. I'm going to go quickly through the Seder checklist. That's very quick. And then I have 3 stories and messages that I would like to share about Pesach. And then you could use the step-by-step Passover Seder to really go through the order of the Seder yourself. And if anyone has any questions, you can ask me during the question and answer period. So we'll finish with these 3 things. So setting the table. Setting the table is so important on Passover and really Shabbat or holidays, because it sets the tone. Imagine coming to a wedding, and you come to the wedding, there's no flowers, there's no music, there's no candles on the table, no one's dressed up, and it's a wedding, right? You almost can't imagine it. Even though today there was some amazing videos that were circulating. Today there were weddings that in Crown Heights where the bride and groom all they did was they had a chuppah with 10 people, and everyone stood far away from each other. They followed social distancing, and then they drove in their car throughout the whole Crown Heights community, and everyone was on their porches and on their front balconies or in the windows, and they were playing loud music, and everyone was dancing, everyone in their own homes, and going through the streets. And you know what? It was a different wedding, but it was still something very, very beautiful. And there were many rabbis who always felt that so much money is spent on weddings and these celebrations, which is really unnecessary. And sometimes if someone has the ability to do it and they do it, is great. But a lot of times people feel the obligation to do it, right? They have to be like the Jones. If they did it down the block, then I have to do it, and not everyone could afford it. It's very expensive. But it's very difficult, when something is the norm and everyone does it, that you feel like you have to do it. But due to the coronavirus, there were the many beautiful weddings that people had, and it was different. And what we learned is that sometimes something could be different, but it could still be beautiful. And I think like we're all experiencing now, it's different times, it's challenging times, but there's also the silver lining that we could find in everything. So, but coming back to the Seder, this year we're going to be home, and we're going to be by ourselves or with our family. Take the time, treat it like a date night. Imagine you were having a date night with a significant other, or you wanted to, you were taking someone out that you loved on a special evening. You took them to a beautiful restaurant and the table set up nicely. So too, the Seder. Hold on one second. I'm just going to mute everyone. So too, for the Seder, take the time and make your table look beautiful. And it's a little more difficult this year because it's hard to go out and to buy the things, but maybe you have some fresh daffodils that are growing outside of your home that you could collect and you could put on the Seder table. If you're going to the store anyways, Safeway has some beautiful flowers, and you could buy some beautiful flowers and put in the middle of the table. And to put out beautiful settings, and for Passover, if you don't have a special Passover set, you could get beautiful paper plates. You could order a lot of things online, or you could get in Target or Walmart, or in any store that you go to. Just some nice settings. You could even it could be disposable, but for Passover, just to make it extra special. Set up some candles at the table, which we're going to do. We're going to talk about anyways, because we like the women light the candles, and even if there's no women in the home, the tradition is that every home should have at least 2 candles lit for Shabbat or a holiday. So many people think that it's only a mitzvah for the women. It is a special mitzvah for women. But if there's no woman in the home, there's still a mitzvah that there should be candles lit in the home, because candles represent light and the peace of the home. So light the candles. Make some extra special things, whether it's a special avocado dip, which is kosher for Passover, that you could have during the meal, or special salads, and make a few salads for the meal. And whatever it may be, that you go above and beyond, set up the Kiddush cups and the wine, and that when you come to the table, you feel it's special. Another thing, it actually says in Jewish law that for Shabbat and holidays, we should have a special tablecloth for that day, that we don't use the rest of the week, that we take out for Shabbat and the holidays, and that it should be set before the holiday comes in. So during the day sometime, it's good to set up the table so that when Passover comes in, we don't have to start setting up the table. Everything is ready, everything is beautiful, and you start feeling the energy of Passover in the home. The children see it, and even we ourselves see it, to the extent it even says that when Shabbat and the holiday comes in, we should even set our beds. If for whatever reason, it was a busy day, we didn't have a chance to make our beds in the morning, or maybe someone doesn't usually do it, it says that for Shabbat and the holidays, even our beds should be set. Because there's a certain feeling, when the house is in order and things are nice, and then you go into a bed which is ready-made, it's just something extra special. So how much more so our Seder tables, that we should take the time and we should do it extra special. Another thing is that I can't say this is a tradition, but I do think it mentions it somewhere, the idea of having a white table. Again, you do not have to do this. It doesn't say anywhere it has to be white, but there's an idea of having a white table because sort of the white represents the pureness of the day. It's bright and it's very clean, very, and white represents purity. So many people have a tradition to put on white tablecloths in honor of Shabbat and the holidays. It's just something that if you have a white tablecloth, you can do it. It's wonderful, but it's not a must. One other thing that I forgot to mention, very, very important, when I talked about the Seder plate, I forgot to mention the Seder plate is made up of the top part, but we also have the matzahs underneath. So the 3 matzahs, and ideally they should be the hand-baked matzah, as I mentioned earlier, and they represent the Kohen, the Levi, and the Yisrael, which is there are 3 categories amongst the Jewish people. There were really 12 tribes, but all of us are either come from the family of Kohanim or from the family of Levites. They both had special ways they served in the temple. And then the Israelites, which the majority of us are Israelites in a community, for about probably every 100, you have one Kohen, something like that, maybe 1 or 2 Kohanim or Levites. And it's really something just passed down in the family. And to commemorate the Kohen, the Levi, the Israel, all the Jewish people, we have 3 matzahs on our Seder, on the Seder table. And it's the tradition in Chabad, and by many, is that the matzahs go underneath the Seder plate. So some have like a stacked Seder plate where you can put 1 matzah in each section. We just do 1 matzah, a cloth, another matzah, a cloth, another matzah, a cloth, and then on top of that, we do our Seder plate. So it's all together as one, because the matzah is really very much part of the Seder plate. But again, coming back, it's how we set up our table, how we set the mood, that makes a very big difference for the Seder. To go through the checklist really quickly, so we have the checklist looks like this, and then after that I'll finish with 3 short ideas and stories, and then I'll open it up for questions. We have the Seder plate. That's number 1. As I mentioned earlier, the Shemura matzah, we talked about it, check. Wine or grape juice, check, you could have both. By the way, if anyone needs any wine, you can let us know. You could order it through the order form online. From the Seder kit, you could just order wine or matzah, and next week when people are picking up the Seder kits, you can pick up just wine. We have Rashi available and the Moscato d'Asti, which is a sweet blue bubbly wine. Normally we don't sell the wine, but we are making it available this year if anybody needs it, due to the fact that we're not having the public Seder. Then we have the hard-boiled egg, a roasted piece of meat for the zeroa, chicken neck, or the shank bone, romaine lettuce. And it's great to get the romaine lettuce, which is pre-washed, the triple washed, is really good. I believe Sam's Club usually sells them, and they're great because it makes it better for Passover that it was washed 3 times already, and there's less of a chance that there'll be any bugs. Ground horseradish, you can get in many of the stores. You can get the horseradish root. No, I'm actually a little concerned this year. Usually we buy a lot of the horseradish from different places, and then we prepare it for the Seder. This year, with everyone doing the Seder at home, I'm sure there's going to be a bigger demand, and it's probably going to be hard to find, which means we better go soon and get our horseradish. So everyone here who's listening, make sure to get your horseradish early and not wait too long, and ask the stores to please bring in horseradish. Because if you ask them, they could try their best to bring it in. Tell them it's for the holiday. Then the charoset we talked about, the vegetable we talked about, saltwater, candles, haggadah, kiddush cup. So kiddush cup, I mentioned earlier, it's great to have a silver kiddush cup. You could use one that's plastic, also a disposable. That's perfectly fine. But it is better. The nicer, the better. It could even be glass, a glass kiddush cup. That's wonderful as well. And you should have a plate just for your kiddush cup, because the kiddush cup, there's certain times when you pour out the wine and you need to catch the wine. And therefore, I would even recommend having a bowl. A bowl is the best, because this way, when you spill out the wine and you're carrying it around, you don't have to worry about spilling wine. And the last thing, this is a bonus, it's not on, the kiddush cup is not on the checklist, but the last thing is a pillow. Many people have a tradition to bring a pillow to the Seder, so that when we lean to the left side, when we're eating our matzah or drinking our wine, it's a sign of freedom. Because in the olden days, a sign of royalty would be that they would lean while they eat. If you actually look at some of the beautiful paintings of royalty, you see that they're on a couch and they're leaning. They're totally leaning, and they have this beautiful feast in front of them, and you're wondering, why are they lying down with all this food? Is it just posing for the picture? Actually, that's the way that they would eat. It was a sign of royalty to be lying while you eat, but you lean to the left side, because if you lean to the right side, it could be dangerous. The food has to pass the windpipe, but when you lean to your left side, there's no worries about that. And that's where the sages who were careful, not just about spiritual things, but also our physical health, said that we have to make sure that when we eat, we always lean to the left side. So the tradition, many people bring a pillow to the Seder, again, just to be comfortable while you're leaning, again, a sign of royalty at the Seder. So every time at the Seder, we do something that reminds us of slavery, we don't lean. And every time we do something that reminds us of freedom, like eating the matzah or drinking the wine, we lean to the left side. So that's the pillow. So I'm going to finish with just 3 interesting messages. I think when you're having your Seder, I would recommend that whoever is joining the Seder should have something to share. So if you're having the Seder yourself, I would recommend a few meditations. Prepare a few things, and we actually have in the step-by-step Seder a few meditations that you could have during the Seder. Things to think about during the Seder, because again, this is a time of breaking free from our own Mitzrayim, our own Egypt. And if you're going to have others at the Seder, even children, have them prepare a little thought, something to share. If you're going to be you and your spouse, each one of you should prepare something that during the Magid, the main point of the Seder, when we're telling the story, to share something, a thought, a message, a story that you heard about Passover, because a very big part of the Seder is not just, all the things that we do at the Seder, but it's the stories that we tell and the messages that we share. So I just want to share 3 short ones. The first one is the story of Moses and the lamb. This is a story that the story is not in the Haggadah, but it's a beautiful story. And that's when Moses went after that one lamb, when he was watching the lamb, the sheep of his father-in-law, Yitro, when he escaped Egypt and he had to run away from Pharaoh, and that's where he met his wife. He was a shepherd for many years. And before Hashem chose him to be the one to take the Jewish people out of Egypt, one day he was watching the sheep, and one of the sheep ran away from the rest of the herd. And he had to run after it. And he goes after it, and he finally finds it, and it went far away. And when he finally found it, he brings it back to the rest of the herd. And when Hashem saw that, Hashem said, "This is a true leader." He could have said, there's only one sheep, it's okay, let me take care of the others. He said, no, there's one sheep that went astray, it's in danger. Let me make sure this is brought back to be with the rest of the sheep. And this is the quality of a true leader. That a leader is one who doesn't just think about the whole and forget about the individual, but also remembers to think about the individuals. And that holds, many lessons. And I think it's a beautiful story that we could share at the Seder table. Another one is the pouring out of the wine. I always share this at our public Seder because I think the message is very important. When we mention the 10 plagues at the Seder, what we do is, sorry, one second. Some people have a tradition to dip their pinky finger in the wine and take out a little bit of wine. And some pour a little bit of the wine out, each one of the 10 plagues into the bowl. And we don't drink that wine. We fill up our cup afterwards again. Why do we do this? Because it says is that we don't rejoice in someone else's downfall. Even though we're grateful to Hashem, that Hashem took us out of Egypt and gave us all these miracles, we never celebrate when someone else has a downfall, even our enemy. And therefore, when we're talking about the 10 plagues, we take a little bit of our joy, which wine represents joy, and we spill it out. To remember that we're not here to focus on the pain that the Egyptians went through, the suffering that the Egyptians went through, the punishment. And it wasn't, revenge. We're focusing on the miracles that Hashem gave us. And in general in life, that's so important. We don't focus on the negative against someone else. We just focus on our own positive blessings. And we thank Hashem for those. Even when we have someone who hurt us, even when there was someone who caused us a lot of harm, a lot of pain, and it could sit with us for a very long time. The truth is that the Jewish approach is that we don't wish for the downfall of another person. King David never prayed for the downfall of his enemies. He just prayed to God that he should be successful and that bad in general should be removed from the world. but not that his enemies should be destroyed, but that the bad in them should be destroyed. So that's number 2. And the last one is the beautiful story of Aaron's staff. When God sent, this story is also not in the Haggadah, but it's part of the story. When Hashem sent Moshe and Aaron to Pharaoh to let the Jewish people go, they said, Pharaoh's going to want a sign. Hashem said, Aaron should take his staff, throw it to the floor. It's going to turn into a snake. And this is going to be one of the signs. There was another sign as well. This is going to be a sign that you are sent here by God and not on your own accord. And that's exactly what happened. When Moshe and Aaron came before Pharaoh, Pharaoh said, who are you, right? Where do you come from? Who are you? And they said, we are not our own, we don't come with our own power, we come with the power of God. And Aaron took his staff, he threw it on the floor, and it turned into a snake. Again, to make a long story short, his snake turned back into a staff, and then, so Pharaoh said, you're bringing magic to Egypt? We have so much magic over here in Egypt. So they all took their staff, all the magicians of Pharaoh took their staffs, they threw it on the floor, and it turned into snakes. Pharaoh says, you're bringing magic to Egypt? We all have magic over here. Suddenly, Aaron's staff turned back into a staff and swallowed all the other staffs. And this was the great miracle that happened. And that was the first moment when Pharaoh realized that there's a greater power going on over here. And the question is asked, why was it that Aaron threw down his staff? We know Moshe could not speak clearly. He had a lisp. And therefore Hashem sent Aaron with him. But why is it that Aaron, we use his staff, where Hashem said his staff should be thrown down and not Moses' staff? It should have been Moses' staff. Moses had a staff. His staff should have been thrown down because he was the one who was he was the leader of the Jewish people. So the sages tell us the reason for this is because Aaron was known to be a person of peace and love. Whenever there was a fight between a couple or two people, Aaron would always try to bring peace between those people. And what he did was he would go to the husband and would say, "Oh, your wife feels terrible for what happened." And then when he would go to the wife and say would say, "Oh, your husband feels so terrible," or he would go to both of them and say, "The other one feels so bad, and they just want to make up." And when they would hear that, they said, "Really?" And he said, "Yes, I'm telling you." And then it would bring them back together. And he was known as a person of peace. He would always run after peace. When Aaron died, it says all the Jewish people mourned for 30 days. Why does the Torah tell us all the Jewish people? Because they all loved Aaron, because he was a person of love. So what the Torah is teaching us is that when you want to change another person, the only way you could do it is with love. And that's why Aaron's staff had to be used, not Moses, because Moses was the leader of the Jewish people, but Aaron represents love. And if they want to bring change to Egypt, the only way this could happen, it could come about, truly is from a place of love. And the message that this teaches us, I think it's a very, very important message, is that, we all have people in our lives that we want to change, right? I wish this person was a little bit kinder to me, and I wish my child did this, and I wish my spouse did this, and I wish my coworker did this. And the truth is, you cannot change another person. I don't know if anyone has ever tried, but it usually doesn't work. You're not going to change another person, but you could love them. And if you truly love them, and you become close enough with them, and you could share with them positive messages, and you could have an open and healthy dialogue, change between the two of you could come about. But it could only come about when the intention is love. If the intention is love, and you truly love them, it's possible that they could change in the long run. But if you just want to change another person just to change them, it's never going to happen. So those are just 3 beautiful messages, and there's so many more. You can go on to Chabad.org, you can search online, but I would say a big part of the Seder is sharing these messages. Again, if you're going to be by yourself, to prepare a few, meditations for the Seder. We included a few over here. Just some things to think about. What is it that you want to break free from in your own life? What habits, or what do I want in my Judaism, my connection with Hashem? What are the things that are holding me back from being my best self this year? So we're going to finish with this.